The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburb of Westbrook, casting long shadows across the tree-lined streets. At Westbrook High, the day began as it always did, with students shuffling into classrooms, some chatting in small groups, others scurrying to avoid the attention of those who ruled the school corridors. Among them was Jada Thompson, a 16-year-old girl with bright, inquisitive eyes and a quiet strength that often went unnoticed. Jada was new to Westbrook High, having moved just a month ago from a different state. Her adoptive father, Vin Diesel, had chosen to keep her out of the public eye, wanting her to experience a normal life, far from the cameras, the flashes, and the pressures that came with being a celebrity's child. But even in a school where most students focused on grades, sports, and social status, there was always someone who thrived on intimidation. For Westbrook High, that person was Kyle Maddox. Kyle was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a reputation that seemed to precede him everywhere he went. His locker was decorated with trophies, not for academics, but for the fear he instilled in his classmates. He had a penchant for picking on anyone he considered weak or, in his eyes, different. And unfortunately for Jada, her quiet demeanor and refusal to engage in petty gossip had immediately marked her as a target. The first few weeks had been a careful balancing act for Jada. She avoided eye contact with Kyle, kept her headphones in whenever possible, and limited her interactions with other students. But Kyle had a sixth sense for anyone trying to dodge him. He thrived on confrontation. And he could spot a potential victim from across the cafeteria. It was during lunch one Thursday that the inevitable happened. Jada sat at a corner table in the cafeteria, quietly eating her sandwich and reading a book she had brought from home. She preferred the quiet, the escape that a good story could offer. And today, the world of fantasy novels was far safer than the real world outside. But Kyle had noticed her almost immediately upon entering. He sauntered through the cafeteria, a sly grin spreading across his face. His eyes locked onto Jada, and he knew she was perfect for his next lesson. "Hey, newbie!" shouted, his voice carrying across the cafeteria like a whip. Heads turned and whispers followed. Jada's stomach sank. She had hoped that keeping to herself would make her invisible, but Kyle's attention was impossible. To ignore, Jada looked up, trying to meet his gaze without showing fear. "Hi," she said softly, hoping that a calm, polite response might diffuse the situation. Kyle laughed, deep mocking sound that made nearby students inch away. "Don't. Hi, me, you think you can just sit here like you belong? See how tough you really are." He stepped closer, his shadow looming over her table. Jada's heart pounded, but she refused to back down.
Out.
Something in her chest told her that fear would only make this worse. "I don't want trouble," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her body. "Trouble finds you whether you want it or not," Kyle sneered. He reached for her book, yanking it off the table and tossing it across the cafeteria. Pages fluttered everywhere. "Pick it up, nerd," he demanded. Jada rose slowly, her hands shaking, but her eyes never left his. "I said I don't want trouble," she repeated. Kyle's grin widened. "You'll get it anyway." Before she could react, he shoved her shoulder hard. Jada stumbled, nearly falling to the floor, and several students gasped. Murmurs ran through the cafeteria, but no one intervened. Most were too scared of Kyle to step in, and others simply didn't want to get involved. But just as Kyle raised his hand for another shove, a deep, commanding voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." Everyone froze. Kyle turned sharply, surprised to see a man standing behind Jada. He was massive, broad, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire cafeteria. His dark eyes were calm, but carried an intensity that made it impossible to look away. It was Vin Diesel. Kyle's smirk faltered. Who are you?" he asked, trying to mask the sudden unease creeping into his voice. Vin stepped closer, towering over Kyle. "I'm someone who doesn't like bullies touching my daughter," he said, his tone low and steady. There was a dangerous edge to it, the kind of controlled fury that could snap in an instant. The cafeteria fell silent. Students whispered among themselves, recognizing the man immediately, though few had ever imagined seeing him here in their school. Vin Diesel, The action star, known for his roles in films that celebrated strength, loyalty, and family, was standing in front of them, his eyes locked on Kyle. Kyle tried to recover his bravado. She's nothing, he stammered, his usual confidence wavering. Vin didn't flinch, stepped closer, his voice a calm but menacing growl. Try that again, and you'll regret it. For the first time, Kyle realized that this wasn't a typical confrontation. This wasn't another student who could be intimidated or laughed at. This was someone who exuded strength in a way that was both physical and commanding. Kyle's knees felt weak, and his throat went dry. He suddenly wished he had left Jada alone. Jada watched, amazed and relieved. Her father had always been protective, but she had never expected him to appear. At her school, unannounced. There was a warmth in her chest, a sense of safety she hadn't felt in weeks. Kyle's bullying hadn't just stopped it. It completely evaporated in the presence of someone who demanded respect. Vin knelt slightly to be at eye level with Jada. A subtle gesture that reminded her of the calm he always maintained, even in tense situations. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Jada nodded. She whispered, barely able to speak. Vin's eyes returned to Kyle. "You will apologize right now." Kyle swallowed hard, his ego shattered. The cafeteria was silent, every student watching the drama unfold. He looked at Vin, then at Jada, then back at Vin. Finally, he muttered, I'm sorry." His voice lacked conviction, but it was the best he could muster under the circumstances. Vin nodded once. "Good, now stay away from her." He turned, back to Jada, his face softening. "Come on, let's get out of here." The two of them left the cafeteria, and whispers followed them down the hallway. Some students were in awe, others were gossiping furiously, but one thing was certain. Kyle Maddox had just learned a very hard lesson about underestimating someone and someone's family. Over the next few days, Westbrook High was buzzing with stories about what had happened. Jada, who had always been quiet and kept to herself, suddenly found herself in the spotlight. Some students admired her for the way she had handled Kyle, while others whispered about her mysterious father. But Jada didn't let the attention change her. She was grateful that her father had protected her. But she also knew that strength wasn't about intimidation or fear. It was about standing up for yourself and knowing when to ask for help. Kyle, on the other hand, was left to reckon with his own behavior. He had underestimated Jada, underestimated the consequences of his actions, and underestimated the power of family loyalty. It was a lesson he would not forget, one that left a mark, far deeper than any physical confrontation ever could. As for Jada, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. She continued to attend Westbrook High, but with a newfound confidence. She joined clubs, made friends, and even excelled in sports, finding joy in activities she had previously avoided. And through it all, her father remained a quiet presence. In the background, always supportive but never overbearing. He had taught her an invaluable lesson, that true strength came from courage, integrity, and the knowledge that you were never truly alone. The incident with Kyle became a turning point, not just for Jada, but for the entire school. Students began to stand up for one another, realizing that fear could be overcome, and bullies could be confronted, even in the face of immense power. Jada's story became one of courage and resilience, a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes could emerge in the quietest corners of everyday life. And while Jada knew she had inherited strength from her father, she also realized that her true power came from within, from the ability to face fear, protect herself, and rise above cruelty. In the end, it wasn't Vin Diesel's fame or muscles that had saved her, it was the courage she found in herself, and the love and support of a family that would never let her face the world alone. By the time the year ended, Jada had transformed. From the quiet new girl into a respected and admired student, she had forged friendships, discovered her own voice, and, most importantly, learned that strength wasn't just about physical power, it was about standing up for what was right, even when the world seemed against you. And Kyle Maddox never bothered her again, not because he feared the shadow of a movie star, but because he finally understood that true courage wasn't measured by intimidation. It was measured by the willingness to confront your own mistakes and change for the better.